Welcome to the course on Polymeric Biomaterials. We are in the first week of this course, and the topic of today's lecture is biomaterials from a device perspective. Uh, in earlier lectures, we have seen that a biomaterial rarely is used in an isolated fashion, but is typically employed as part of a device. So, it would make sense for us early on in the course to understand how biomaterials work together as part of a device. And as we've already seen, performance also is subject to not how the material on its own performs, but how it performs as part of a device. So that also involves things like how the material is processed to go into the final form, how it is shaped, how it is sized. All these factors play a role in determining how the material eventually performs in an application as part of a device. So in this lecture, we will first start off with understanding what are the different classes of biomaterials. We will look at metals, ceramics and polymers. We've earlier looked at generations of biomaterials from a functionality perspective. Here we will look at it from a material structure perspective, structure property perspective. Then we will look at two related terms that you will hear often in the biomaterials literature. One of them is word called implant and the other is prosthesis. So we will see what they are and how they are used and what is the correct way to use them. And then we will see how examples of how specific classes of biomaterials, namely metals, ceramics and polymers in different forms and shapes can be integrated either two of them together or sometimes all three of them together depending on the application as part of a device. And there we will look at a few examples, namely drug-eluting stents, dental implants, and then total hip replacements. And then we will also look at examples of devices, clinical examples of devices that have been used, that are deployed. And then we will end with a note on what does it take for a biomaterial to go from, let's say, the lab to the clinic, or what we call the bench to the bedside. What does that pathway look like? What are the checkpoints? So we will look at that as well. So we'll begin first with biomaterial classes, and as broadly we have divided them into metals, ceramics and polymers. We will briefly look at their properties and how those properties in turn directly impact the applications in which they are deployed. So we'll start with metals first. Metals, as you will be familiar with, are associated with strength, high modulus, properties like conductivity and ductility and shaping ease. So these are all properties that we associate with metals. Now that immediately then dictates the types of applications for which metals have been deployed historically and even today. Largely, they are used in applications that require mechanical load, for example, or in applications that require conductivity. In heart pacemakers, for example, titanium is used to send electrical impulses, and there metals are deployed. Or even cochlear implant devices, these are ear implant devices. We can also have dental prostheses where the metal there can serve multiple roles, including where there is a missing tooth from the root itself. You can now have a screw that sits inside. This could be a titanium screw, for example. Right? So some examples of metals that are commonly used are cobalt chromium, for example in prosthesis, stainless steel, titanium and gold and platinum. These are more commonly used in applications that require conductivity. You can also have then ceramics, which are associated with properties such as resistance to wear, and they can also be hard and brittle. Some ceramics, ceramic is a broad term for a lot of different types of materials, and some of them can be bioactive. And we have seen this word bioactive in the previous lecture, and we have seen what it means, for example, for a bioglass to be called bioactive, which is a ceramic. Um, so typical applications again, not unlike metals, we're looking at load bearing applications. We also saw that you can have coatings on metal implants, ceramic spray coated ceramic implants that improve the surface bioactivity of the implants, thus leading to better degree of osseointegration with the surrounding bone tissue. Of course, you can have dental implants and bone grafts that are used. So typical examples include alumina, zirconia type of ceramics. Then you can have the bioactive silicate based classes, which also include ions such as calcium and phosphate in different ratios. You can also have calcium phosphate based ceramics. So hydroxyapatite is an example of a calcium phosphate based ceramic. And that's just one example. You can also have amorphous calcium phosphate with different calcium phosphate ratios, and those directly impact how soluble they are, what kind of ions they will release, how slow they will release, what kind of effects those will have on the cells surrounding them, and so on. So next we look at polymers, uh, and unlike metals or ceramics, uh, polymers, it's very hard to talk about properties that cut across polymers, and that's one thing that we will see throughout this course, that polymers can represent a wide variety of properties depending on their structure. Right? So you see a wide range of mechanical properties and physicochemical properties. Of course, the mechanical properties will definitely be much lower than metals and ceramics, but still you can have a range even there. Uh, for example, you can have something that is brittle, something that is ductile, something that is like an elastomer. All these are examples of mechanical properties associated with different types of polymers. And depending on the application, one can use either an elastomer or a hard and brittle polymer. You can also have synthetic or naturally derived polymers, and we will look at both of these in great detail in the coming weeks. And of course, you can have degradable or non-degradable polymers. Polymers are unique in that you can engineer them to be degradable at very controlled rates, as we saw in the previous lecture, where you can now think about designing materials for applications that demand specific rates of degradation, right? And that can be tuned as well. And so the applications also, because the properties are so wide ranging, the applications also are pretty wide ranging. You can have something as straightforward as a cosmetic application, to bone cement, to lenses, sutures, fixation screws. You see that the applications are as wide ranging as the properties. So some examples of polymers that are typically used are polymethyl methacrylate, which uh, was used for intraocular lenses, which we saw earlier when we were looking at the history of biomaterials. And if you recall, the way this was discovered, that this could be tolerated by the body, was also serendipitous. We can also have polytetrafluoroethylene, PTFE. This can be used for vascular grafts, access grafts. And collagen, of course, is a naturally derived structural protein, and you can think of it as a polymer with very unique properties that is found in tissues like tendons and ligaments. Collagen, along with, for example, some growth factors, can also be used for engineering bone tissues, especially when combined with this protein called bone morphogenic protein 2. So that's the spectrum we're talking about, going from metals with specific properties to ceramics to polymers. These are the different classes that we've looked at. Now remember that our goal is to now understand how these are employed as part of a device. So for that, we'll first start by asking, what is an implant? Now this is a word that you will hear quite often in the biomaterials literature. The first thing you want to do is to contrast that with a transplant, which is typically an organ or a tissue. That's what a transplant is. Whereas an implant is a device that is usually surgically or medically introduced, and is engineered using biomaterials. Now, some of these biomaterials could involve natural polymers, but the device itself, the way it is made, is all man-made. And because it is implanted, it is typically intended to remain for a long period of time, because it's going to serve that function for that period of time. So either after that time period it needs to be replaced in some cases, or after that time period it may, for example, a polymer might degrade and its functionality may no longer be required, depending on the context. Some examples of implants include hernia meshes. These are typically polypropylene or PET, polyethylene terephthalate based materials. You can also have cardiovascular stents, and you can also have pacemakers, and shown on the right here is an example of a, a pacemaker. What the pacemaker does here is, firstly, there is what is called the sinus node um, naturally in the body that acts as the natural pacemaker. So this is the natural pacemaker of the body that fires electrical impulses for the heart to beat and function correctly. Now, misfiring or issues with the cells associated with the sinus node can lead to the heart not beating correctly, which means external intervention is required, for which um, abnormal rhythms can be corrected by artificial pacemakers, where there is a wire that is used, and typically this is a titanium wire that supplies that because it's conductive, it's used, and it supplies the electrical impulses, and it also has a polyurethane insulation. So you see right away that the two different classes of materials are integrated here. One is a metal which has a specific functionality. One is a polymer which has a different functionality. So you can have a titanium wire and a polyurethane insulation. And these are just two very important aspects of the pacemaker. The pacemaker itself is a much larger device than just these two. But our goal here is to understand what the role of specific materials is in a device such as the pacemaker, which is implanted. Now, you can also have something called a prosthesis that may or may not be surgically introduced, but it's largely intended to replace a missing body part, right? So it can have either aesthetic, there can be aesthetic reasons for why you would want to put a prosthetic, or you can have functional reasons why you want to put a prosthetic, and we will look at examples of both of these. And typically, a prosthetic is usually patient specific. In the sense that right from how it is designed to how it is shaped to how it is sized, especially if it is used for aesthetic applications, then it's very important that it is customized for a specific patient. Some examples of prosthetics include removable dentures. These are common everyday examples that you would probably come across in your life. You would know somebody who has removable dentures. And then we also have silicone fingers for missing digits. Then you can sort of use silicone fingers as replacements, and robotic lower leg replacements for people who have lost that kind of functionality. Now notice that these are examples where they are not surgically introduced necessarily, and while they are intended to replace the missing body part, they also serve the function of that body part, which means the dentures can be used when needed, but because they are removable, the patient can remove them when they are not needed and then put them back and forth. So unlike implants, which are typically implanted permanently, or if it is required to be taken outside, then it requires a surgical intervention or clinician's expertise. These are typically done by the patient themselves. Now shown here are removable acrylic dentures, which are acrylic artificial teeth, and shown here is a denture which is just the base over which the teeth sit with the acrylic teeth. Now we will look at an example of a prosthetic knee implant where, like a prosthetic, it is intended to serve a specific function. As we saw earlier, the total knee replacement or a total knee prosthesis is a device where it serves to replace the knee itself and the function of the knee, but it has to be implanted. So it requires surgical intervention, and it has a lifetime, and if required, it might require revision or correction later, as the case may be. Now, a device like this broadly can be thought of as three different components. So what you notice here is this is the femur, which is the thigh bone. This is the tibia or the shin bone, and then this is the patella, which is the kneecap. And the device is meant to have these three parts to recapitulate the functionality of the knee when connected to these things. So, for example, the femoral component is typically cobalt chromium, which is essentially a metal cap to replace the end of the femur. And then there's a tibial tray like this, which is a platform lined with the polyethylene insert. Now, this tibial component could be made of cobalt chromium or titanium. The patella itself, which is the kneecap, is a dome-shaped polyethylene that recapitulates the kneecap. So, you notice that in one device we have a metal and a polymer that jointly serve the function of a missing or a damaged body part. In this case, typically these kinds of implants or prosthetic implants are required for patients who have this condition called osteoarthritis, where the cartilage that is present in the knee has been degraded because of chronic inflammation and other conditions, resulting in the two bones rubbing against each other, resulting in swelling, inflammation, pain, etc. So, by doing this insertion of the knee implant, one is now able to gain full functionality of the knee to the point where a patient can do most of the activities that they were doing before the implant was, before their knee had gotten or deteriorated. Of course, there are some restrictions that will be put on the patients, but a lot of the regular day-to-day activities should be possible with such an implant. So, shown here is post-operative X-ray of a normal knee prosthesis, where you typically see that there are these components that we talked about, which is the femoral component. This is the tibial component. This is called the tibial stem. And what you don't see on the X-ray, of course, is this gap region in between, which is where the polyethylene liner sits. And this prosthesis is designed so that at any point the metal always interfaces with plastic. In this case, high molecular weight, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. This is to avoid metal on metal contact, which, as we saw earlier, can have significant negative consequences with metal leaching into the bloodstream. So, this implant avoids that, right? But again, this is also an example of a device that integrates multiple classes of materials into a prosthetic implant which serves to replace a damaged part of the body but is also implanted. Now we will also look at clinical examples of in some other contexts of devices that integrate multiple classes of biomaterials. We will first look at drug-eluting stents, which essentially are metallic stents that are used for patients suffering from coronary artery disease. And what happens in these patients is the arteries get blocked by plaques, which are just largely fat deposits, lipid deposits. You want to restore blood flow in those affected arteries, because otherwise that can have very severe consequences for the patient. So one way to do this is to ensure that you go through and put in a stent which is implanted. Now what you see here on the right is the metal itself, the implant or the stent itself. And shown below on the cartoon is the procedure with which through which this implant is put inside. This is called balloon angioplasty. So the stent is mounted on a balloon catheter, and then it's slowly inserted into the diseased artery in the first step. And then in the second step, the balloon is inflated, and that causes the stent to expand and settle into the wall of the arteries. And as it does that, it pushes away the plaque that was obstructing and locks it in place into the wall of the arteries. Now that expands the blood vessel itself back to its original shape and size, thus restoring the blood flow. And then the balloon is deflated and brought out, right? So, and then the stent continues to remain there, assisting blood flow. Now, there is also an interesting aspect to these stents, which is with time, these stents can undergo issues. One of the issues is that of restenosis. And one example of that is excessive cell growth and tissue growth around the implant, which can again occlude the arteries. So, one way to overcome that is to use a metal stent with a polymer coating and a drug that is released over time to prevent excessive cell growth. So, not only are you solving the problem of plaques right now, you are anticipating that restenosis may happen, and you are actively taking care of that by integrating the stent with a polymer coating, which can release a drug that can prevent this excessive cell proliferation. And it has been shown that drug-eluting stents are far more successful than traditional stents. Commercially, we are looking at just one example of that, where this family of stents from a particular company, essentially they are cobalt chromium alloys with a fluoropolymer coating, releasing this drug called everolimus, which essentially is a drug that inhibits excessive cell growth. This is typically delivered via the arm or the groin, and like we saw earlier, the stent is expanded in situ. In situ simply means on site, at the site of action, using an inflatable balloon and a saline injection. And once the stent is locked in place, so to speak, it's going to help the arteries recover its function. But more importantly, the fluoropolymer coating is going to help the everolimus release over time. And this particular stent is supposed to release about 80% of the drug within a month of implantation and about 100% within 4 months. And it's been shown that that actively prevents restenosis, thus improving not just the success of the implant in the short term, but also improves the longevity of the implant in the long term. So, another example that we will look at is that of dental implants, which also can integrate multiple classes of materials into one device. Earlier we saw a metal with a polymer, Here we are going to be looking at metal with a ceramic. Obviously, dental implants uh, are different from the removable dentures I showed you earlier. Here, the word implant should directly indicate to you that it's going to serve a long-term role and it cannot be removed easily by the patients themselves. Uh, Obviously, it's location dependent mechanical function and appearance. So, typically in these kinds of implants, we have what are called implant supported dental bridges, where if you have more than 2-3 missing teeth, now you want to have support for the teeth from within. And for this, typically what is done is you have something that goes and fills the root of the original missing teeth, and that's called the post. This is typically uh, titanium, which is simply the artificial tooth root. Now, this is a surgical procedure that requires a trained surgeon to implant it, and this is going to take about anywhere between 3 to 6 months to fully integrate and set inside. Thereafter, it is followed by an abutment screw and the abutment itself, which also has to be locked in place and that has to set, following which you have the artificial tooth itself, which is a ceramic prosthetic. So, the abutment can be something like titanium again, and the ceramic itself could be something like zirconia. Of course, you can have colored ceramic to match the aesthetic appeal of the rest of the teeth, etc. Those are more aesthetic, but you notice right away that there are different parts to this, and you can have both the metal root, which is the implant post, that is absolutely required to ensure that when you have more than a few teeth missing, then you ensure that whatever you're putting in sits there, particularly if it is the lower jaw where the mechanical forces can be pretty significant. You ensure that whatever is going in as a bridge is supported by the implant post. Of course, the tooth itself, the artificial crown itself, is made of ceramic. So, shown here is a picture of that where you have 3 of them here, and then you have the titanium roots or the posts going in with the abutments in place. And shown here is a radiograph where an entire arch, for example, instead of just 2-3 teeth, if an entire arch has to be replaced, then you need more supports than just 1 or 2. When you're looking at all on 4 or all on 6, depending upon the patient age, the nature of the arch itself, how much space is there, all these factors go into determining whether they use an all on 4 supported or all on 6 supported implant. So, the last example we are going to look at is that of the hip replacement prosthesis. So, here we are also going to now see what are the possible sources of failure that can occur. Essentially what we are seeing is, in the earlier ones we saw how different classes were integrated to give specific types of functionality in one device. Here, in addition to that, we are also going to see, obviously the functionality is mechanical largely, but we are also going to see how different parts of the device itself can have different types of issues that can crop up, leading to different types of adverse reactions, both in the short term and in the long term. So, we are looking at implant failure in the sense that we are going to look at how these different parts can contribute to implant failure in some form or fashion. And notice that this implant failure does not necessarily mean the implant breaks. That could be one aspect of failure, but by failure we mean here that the implant is not only not doing its expected functionality, but it is also causing adverse reactions that are not intended. So, for example, you can have a metal femoral stem for strength and modulus, typically titanium or cobalt chromium, but you can have, as we saw, metal ions leaching. If you have, for example, metal or metal implant, because of abrasion, you can have metal ions leaching. You can also have very interesting issue called stress shielding, where bone is one of those tissues that needs to be loaded often to stay healthy. This is largely because of a biological process called mechanotransduction, where this is why for patients who have undergone any orthopedic surgery, physiotherapy is extremely important because the bone that is healing has to be subjected to specific types of mechanical loads that new bone keeps forming quickly. But what happens is, if your mechanical properties of your implant that you're putting in are over-engineered, in the sense that they outperform the mechanical properties of the underlying bone itself, then all the stress that's coming, all the load that is coming in from outside in the form of mechanical loads during everyday activities, all that load will be taken up by the implant itself and not by the bone. And this will result in a phenomenon called stress shielding, where the bone actually will not be able to form new bone because it is not taking up any of the load. And it's the titanium which will take up most of the load. And that could be another aspect that one needs to consider when designing these implants. Another material that is used, as we saw earlier, is the polymer acetabular cup for wear and aging resistance. Typically, it's ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which usually functions quite well. Like we saw in an earlier lecture, Teflon performs very poorly. In fact, that was the first material that was tested by Shanley before he started looking at high molecular weight polyethylene as an alternative. So Teflon performs very poorly in very poor wear resistance. It can quickly lead to a lot of debris. Ultra high molecular weight polyethylene definitely performs a lot better than that, but in the long run it can still lead to debris because of these articulating surfaces, and that polymer debris can lead to chronic inflammation because you now have polymeric material that's coming out of the liner, which can now cause localized inflammation, initiating a series of reactions, biological reactions, because now the host is now responding to those materials that are coming out. You can also have the ceramic femoral head, which is used in the metal implant, which is used for its low coefficient of friction, typically alumina or zirconia. But ceramics tend to be also brittle and may end up breaking in the long run, although increasingly that is becoming a rarity. Designs have gotten better and better, but that is still something that could happen. There is one more material that was used, which we saw earlier in the context of intraocular lenses, which is polymethyl methacrylate, often called plexiglass, PMMA. Interestingly, it's also used as polymer cement in fixing these metal hip replacement prostheses. So you see that while we were interested in some failure mechanisms here, what you should also appreciate is that a single device like this can include titanium, which is a metal, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which is a polymer, alumina zirconia, which is ceramic, and PMMA, which is again a polymer. So no single biomaterial by itself will serve this function, but it's a combination of biomaterials with a specific set of unique properties on their own together jointly serve the function of the hip replacement. So now you have slightly a larger sense of appreciation for regular activities that you can do with your knee and your hip. So as we saw earlier, the primary causes of failure include aseptic loosening of the implant, dislocation, osteolysis can occur because of this debris that comes out, and then fracture, which is less common, but that can also happen if sudden loads, unexpected, etc., are put. So what you're seeing here is on the left you see two images where this one is a normal implant and this one has a loosened implant. So this is what we would call aseptic loosening. On the right, you see a more extreme case, which is a dislocated implant due to abnormal movement or injury. And you can also have this loosening happening due to high impact or wear and tear. So, in such cases, revision surgery is usually required because the implant is now not functional. In fact, it has led to more problems. So, it is important for us to understand some of these as we design uh, biomaterials as part of devices that can function in a specific application. So, before we conclude, we will look at now um, what it takes from taking a biomaterial in the lab to fabricating it as part of a device, medical device that can eventually be implanted as part of clinical translation. So, this is what we call the bench to bedside pathway or lab to clinic pathway. And what you're asking here is a very simple question. What does it take to develop and translate an implantable device? So, first of all, there is a need and a market associated with this. This is directly related to disease burden or incidence of accidents or injury. This directly determines what is the need and what is the market potential. Right? Next comes the device design, which is tailored for a specific need. Then you start thinking about the materials that are required for a specific device or a specific application, and there you're thinking about availability and production of the material. Once these materials are available and produced, then you're looking at material testing, where you're looking at things like mechanical behavior, toxicity, and biostability. Once these initial tests are done, then comes fabrication, which wherein now you integrate these things as part of a device. So, for this, we're looking at material integration, and this could be materials across classes, sizing, and shaping. Then you have what we call device testing. Once you have made the material, you test the device, and although you have tested the materials themselves initially, now you test them as part of a device, because remember that there is no such thing as a biocompatible material. That's a golden rule that you should probably remember through the rest of this course. What actually matters is biocompatibility is defined with respect to how a material performs in a specific application. So, we are looking at device testing, and this could first involve in vitro testing and then animal testing. And then you have regulatory mechanisms which involve clinical trials and follow up. And then comes finally, after all this, comes the clinical use, where it is patient centric. If you remember, I earlier talked about, in an earlier lecture, I talked about Fick testing glass lenses on himself and other people back in the 1800s. And at that point, I said this would no longer be possible. Now, perhaps you have a better understanding of why this is no longer possible, because you have to go through all these steps to be able to take a material and to commercialize it in the form of a device. And explant analysis is put separately because that's only if there is failure requiring pathological investigations. So, that should give you a good sense of how we can go from the lab to the clinic or from bench to bedside. Again, the key here is to realize whether it's biocompatibility, bioactivity, or function and performance of biomaterials. Eventually, in a clinical application, it is part of a device or part of a system as part of which it is deployed. And all of those things are usually contextual. They are specifically contextualized to a specific application, which is why the same material has to go through, again, very rigorous testing. Although it may have been approved many years ago for a specific application, for a new application as part of a different device, as part of being implanted in a different location of the body, where the conditions would be different, it still has to go through a series of rigorous testing. And many of the results from the previous testing will not be of much use here because this is a new application, this is a new part of the body, this is a new location for the system. It's going to experience different biological mechanisms, different mechanical forces perhaps, different pH perhaps. So all of that has to be accounted for. So I hope that gives a sense of how we can go from a material and integrating many such materials into devices that can be eventually deployed.